We're recording now.
Good.
Cool. Hello.
What's up?
Hi, we're all here.
Hi, we're all
There's
putting
like
this
7 of us.
here.
You have a timer this time. Who's up first?
Got communion.
Oh, that's me.
Alright.
I definitely found. I don't know if I found. No, never mind. I had equal amounts compared to last time. The first thing I kind of had was like Christmas dinner in the barracks. I thought that was like interesting. The little boy got a Swiss Army knife, which seems like a questionable decision. But I don't know. I thought that was interesting because it kind of just like brought him like a little spark of joy, just like that Christmas kind of vibe.
Christmas.
Amongst a very long period of just sorrow and misery. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Page 103, I had like, the boy was just like dreaming of like anything to quench his thirst. So it was, where was it? This page. Yeah. So it was like longing for ice, a section of orange, a stone, something, anything to suck on to quench his thirst. So that was just like, I don't know, I feel like it just represents pretty well the environment that they were stuck in. Because at this time it was summer, and with Utah being like a very harsh winter but very hot summers, it just showed that very well, and just how much or how little they had at that time. And then on page 113 was when they got back to their house, and it was kind of just like their first meal back. They really didn't have much at that time because all they were given was like $25. But they were still eating like they were in the barracks, just shoveling down food, even though the mom was saying like just like hold your heads high, like we can like be civilized people. But like they're used to just like shoveling down food as fast as they can so they can get back in the line for seconds, so they could actually get seconds. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's all I had for communion. So quest, I had started on page 93. I felt like that was just like the mom just like was kind of just like, it almost just sounded like giving up almost, like she's just like stuck in where she was at. She was just like doing nothing with her days, and just like, I mean, what is there to do in that situation? So it almost just sounded like she was just like giving up on life almost, which is very sad. And then page 105, I had it was the little boy. He was just, I think it was the little boy, who was just like dreaming of like when he would like be reunited with his father, and just like imagining the whole situation and just the reuniting. So I thought that was just kind of like adding on to the story and how it's going to go and how he's dreaming of it. I don't really have a page for the next one, but it was just like them kind of adjusting to regular life was the whole thing. On top of that, I had page 118, 19. It was just like them looking out the window and like seeing like all these like people come home, which I feel like has got to be like partially kind of like the worst feeling because their father hasn't come home yet. So like you got to watch all these dads, all these people come home, but like your dad's not coming home yet. You have no idea when he's going to be able to come home. So I feel like that's just adds on to it. But like with adjusting to life, it's like the kids getting back into like their school and stuff like that, and receiving, you know, you got to be careful with, you know, there's judgment all around them in the world and etc. And just everything to go along with that. So I feel like that just kind of adds on to the quest part. Do you want to do Mark for Greatness next, or should I just finish with geography?
We can just go in order.
Okay.
I'll go. Okay, so my first thing from Mark for Greatness I found is on page 97. And this is when it describes the boy, and he's in the camp, and talks about how there's scabs on his knees and scars on his calves just from like everyday life. And then later in 119, let me find where it's at. Oh, it talks about the soldier returning home with like a missing leg. So that just like obviously from the war when all the men started coming home. But that's the only two things that I had from Mark for Greatness. There wasn't really anything else.
Geography, I had on page 94 and 95, the mother was kind of just like dreaming about her past life in Japan, like when she was little. Just kind of like what she had and like experiences and memories. I thought that was pretty significant, just with everything being associated with Japan in America was like at that time obviously not great. So I was just, I don't know, I felt like that memory and just thinking of it was kind of important. I feel like there was a lot in there that I really didn't put down because it was just stuff that was repeated over and over again, you know, just the dust and sand blowing around in the summers and the harsh winters. And like they had to line up to get like old coats from World War I and stuff like that. So there's kind of that stuff that I didn't necessarily write down on my paper. The last thing I had, if I can read it, on page 109, when they got back, it says in like the middle of the page, like they had not smelled the sea in years. And I thought that was kind of interesting just because like, obviously they were in Utah, which is far from the sea, but like, I felt like the sea kind of like, it can represent freedom in a way and just like being able to go wherever you want and do whatever. So I felt like that was just kind of interesting that like now that they are free, that kind of represents a sign of freedom for them. So that's, that's my last page. That's all I had.
Symbolism. I don't have the paper.
Symbolism, yeah.
All right. So for symbolism, I have on page 107. There's the description of the key that the mother kept around her neck the whole time that they were gone, and that's just symbolic of how she like really never, let go of their house or anything like that. Never truly gave up hope or anything like that. Like the whole time, right? They keep being like, "Oh, we'll go home soon. We'll go home soon." The whole time that they were there, and so it just kind of helps with the symbolism of like how they they never really gave up hope while they were there. Then on page 109, there's the section where they said, "We put down our things and ran from one room to the next, shouting, 'Fire! Help! Wolf!'" These are all things that they probably would not have been allowed to just like yell out while they were at, like, especially if if there wasn't actually fire or someone who needed help or a wolf while they were at the camp. And so, just because they are now singing it or, yelling these things out, which is, emblematic of just how, they're like, "Oh, we're free now." Then on page 118, they're given $25 after being released from these camps, which it says that that's the amount given to criminals on the day that they were released from prison, which really just shows how the U.S. didn't see them as anything more than just criminals, really. Even though they didn't do anything, they were just, rounded up and imprisoned just because they needed to be rounded up and imprisoned according to
trust
the
issues.
Yeah, because of trust issues. Yeah, and then also on page 118, we've got the description of all the fathers being returning from war, and it's just like it's hard to read that part and not be thinking about their father who has not been returned to them, and when he is returned won't be showered with like, "Oh, how was the war? How was all these like questions and all these like, oh, you've done your country a great service." It's like, no, we hate you when you return. And then on page 119, one of the soldiers was talking about how, he says, we didn't even have names, I was 326. Which, you know, they didn't have names, characters in this book don't have names, so there's just a parallelism of like how they just were treated like they were prisoners, and how that doesn't really like, or how it isn't like the contrast between how the prisoners of war return and how the Japanese prisoners return. So yeah. Then for the weather, if on page 92, it talks about how it is winter in the camps, and winter is emblematic of just how it's how like, you know, things are dark and bad. You know, things are always sadder during the winter. And then on page 107, they're home now, and it's the beginning of spring, which would be, you know, emblematic of a of like, you know, a rebirth time. Like, oh, we're free now, but in reality, things had kind of barely changed for them. I mean, they still act the same way that they did when they were in prison. You know, they shovel down their food, they set up their beds or whatever in the same way that they did before. And so it's just like a juxtaposition of like, this should be like a new time, a time of change, or a new beginning for them, but it really just like isn't, and it's just like things are still terrible. And at the end of the story on page 137, it's talking about it's the last days of spring. Yeah, it says, hey, what does it say? Last days of spring. Should I read that wrong?
The first signs of
The
spring.
first signs of spring. Okay, maybe I read that wrong then. But yeah, okay, so it says the first signs of spring, and this one's a bit more of like a rebirth time, because presumably like a year has passed, but things are still pretty, like as we see by just the end of the story, it seems to be that things were just not going to be great for the foreseeable future. So yeah.
Okay. I had fairy tales, so obviously not a lot here, so I had to get creative. So page 88, at the top, it talks about how the boy was staring at the laundry lines and how the wind was like blowing them into shapes. And he said, or he thought, like they are frozen white sails, which was interesting, so I thought that was fitting. And then later on page 93, the top, it says, their old life seemed far away and remote to him now, like a dream he could not quite remember. The bright green grass, the roses, the house on the wide street, not far from the sea, that was another time, a different year. And so I just wrote that their old life started to become like a dream, like a fairy tale to them that they won't ever be able to reach. And then later, on page 126, I went back and read the chapter in the How to Read Literature Like a Professor book, and it said any reference to like religion is like counts as fairy tales, and it talked about how the mother found the stone Buddha laying face down in the dirt. So yeah, that's all I have for that.
It's interesting that they relate religion to fairy tale.
I know. I don't really see how that fits,
I
but
don't really agree with that, but
Yeah, I took again, there's not really anything referencing Greek mythology, so I turned that into just like general religion. And I only had one thing written down. On page 103, there's this kind of like heartbreaking moment where he's talking about, where the boy is referencing karma, where he's like, you know, what if I stopped biting my nails and remembered to do everything the first time I was told? And what if I said my prayer every night and ate all my coleslaw? That might just do the trick, you know, just, he's blaming himself for the situation that they're now in. It's just karma that is, a belief, that is a popular belief system that I talked about like 2 weeks ago. But yeah, it's that moment specifically, I was like, this is heartbreaking. So yeah, that's kind of all I have for the Greek mythology section, but
When a kid is just willing to do anything to make it better, like
Yeah.
willing to try anything, even if it's silly, it's really sad.
yeah, and he's over here being like, oh, I bite my nails, I need to stop doing that, then I won't be free.
I thought he had like OCD or something. I thought that's why he was doing that stuff.
I think that when you're a child in a very difficult situation, you often think that there's something that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Being a child who grew up in a very horrible situation, I like relate to that a lot and thinking that like you could do something to fix it, and I think that that's probably what him and his sister probably both thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, I can just do something, and like something that I do will make a difference.
Yeah, or it's
Kid-
because I'm doing something that I'm in this situation
Right,
in the
and
first place.
kids are too small to realize that they're just kind of a
Sometimes-
victim to their situation.
Yeah, sometimes the world just doesn't like you.
Yeah, are we on to
External.
section 2? Okay. I think I had external, right?
You did.
Okay, good.
Were you sweating over there?
Just making sure. Page 75 to 76. We touched on this last week when we did our 15-minute page lead or whatever. But it talks about how they burned the family photographs, they burned the records of Japanese opera, they threw away all the stuff that had to do with the Japanese culture, and it's not really a conflict, but it's more of like how they reacted to the conflict. In order to protect themselves and stay out of trouble, they had to become more different, like completely different, and just live and act completely different, all because of how they were being portrayed and seen from the government, really. And also on page 76, they had specific rules that only Japanese people had to follow, and that like other Americans didn't have to. Just showed the hatred that they had towards them and just the racism in entirety. And then on page 90, let me find this. Since the father was taken as a prisoner, their bank account was frozen and they couldn't even withdraw any money. So that was just something that, like, unfortunate for them, and like that they experienced, just an example of the hardship and the acts against them that they faced. On page 92 through 93, it says on days when there was hot water. So that's just a way of showing that even some days they didn't even have hot water, and just shows the living conditions that they were living in, especially during the winter. That would have been bad. And it also talks about the outbreaks of flu and diarrhea that were spreading around the camps because everyone's like by each other, so close, so that would spread more. And they only had 2 army blankets per person, which isn't the best, I guess, for the winter. And then page 96 through 97, it's just the absence of their father was really just a lot for them, and they miss him a lot, and it affects them and how they live their life, and they're always mentioning him. I guess that could be towards more internal conflict, but it's because their father is physically away from them that they feel like this, and they stay up at night, and they just, are just always thinking about, like, when is he coming back? Like, when are we leaving to see him? And then on page 98, I thought this was funny, when she's jumping rope in the middle of the night, she talks about how she's a terrible jumper, and that's a callback to way earlier. I couldn't find the exact page, but at school when she was, when like at recess or whatever, when they were jumping rope, she was always the one holding the rope, and they never let her jump on the rope. And this is a callback. She's like, I'm a terrible jumper, and that's just a callback to how they even treated her. I'm not sure if that was after Pearl Harbor, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor that event happened, or that was just like before. That's just how she was experienced, or just what she experienced at school. But yeah, just another example of conflict. And page 101, a man was supposed to have been innocently shot by the fence. This is when he was walking his dog, I believe. And then he was reaching across to grab a flower, or he saw a flower, and he had bad hearing, so he didn't hear the guard saying, hey, back away, back away. He shouldn't hear that. And then he wasn't doing anything wrong necessarily, and then the guard's instinct was just to shoot him. Just another example of conflict. And then page 108, they were just away from their home for 3 years and 5 months, which is just crazy. Like, I couldn't imagine being away from my house for that long, and they're not even in a better or even equal place. They're in a way lesser of conditions and everything that they're dealing with, and that's just awful. And also, they didn't see their father for 4 years. Like, if I didn't see my father, like, that would kind of suck. That wouldn't be the best thing. So that, and then page 112, like as you guys mentioned, even after the war, their lives were still bad. Get mentioned stuff. Yeah, one man's house had been doused with gasoline, set on fire while his family was sleeping inside. Another man's shed had been dynamited, and just showing that there was still conflict. Obviously, even after, people aren't going to forgive them that easily. It takes time for that. And then on page 118, Caleb kind of talked about it, how they were getting $25, the family, but also criminals were getting $25 when they were out of jail. So that just shows, basically, they were viewed as the same as them.
That was Colin as well. We'll give that to him.
Oh, you said that too?
That was mostly Colin.
There's a lot of C names. Well, there's 2 C names.
Well, you talked about it, did you not?
I mentioned it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned it first, that's why
He talked about it in depth.
Colin did too, both of these guys did. Give them extra credit.
Big credit for these two.
And lastly, I've been talking a lot. I have 2 more examples, so bear with me. Again, on 122, they had to act like perfect citizens and act sorry for everything that they did wrong, just so they could stay out of trouble and just stay safe. It said, if we did something wrong, we made sure to say excuse me. If we did something terribly wrong, we'd immediately say we were sorry. Just the way they had to act, because they were so scared of what would happen to them if they acted out of line or just weren't respectful. And then just 127 and 134, it just talks about how the father was when he got back, just what happened to him when he was away and away from his family. He was just completely different. He came back physically worse and mentally worse. The kids didn't even they were so excited to see them, and once they finally saw him, after all those years, they just forgot who he was, and he was not the same man that they remembered. After 4 years, a lot changed and it happens. So yeah, that's basically what I had for external conflict.
I feel like as a father, not seeing your kids for 4 years, and then you finally get to see them again, and obviously, you've been through a lot of crap,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, I feel like that'd be really sad that your kids don't even recognize you. You'd want them to run, sprint at you, big arms and stuff like that, give you a hug or something like that. It was you just get there and they just stand there as who is this guy?
Yeah.
Well, they said, mom had to kind of push him towards it, and then the cane,
Yeah.
they're he was using a cane that he didn't have before.
Yeah.
But it also just shows the, I don't know if brutality is the right word.
It probably is.
It probably is. Of what he had to go through.
Yeah.
And I feel didn't that last chapter kind of fed into that a little bit as well?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I didn't completely
entire
understand
book-
that. It was just kind of out of context.
Like
The
in
entire
confession
book has
chapter?
been
Yeah.
building up for
I was thinking
the return of the father.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it happened, it was super anticlimactic, but that
Mhm.
was definitely intentional, I feel like.
Yeah.
Just because it was he comes back and he's not the same guy that he was before.
Yeah.
He's literally traumatized.
Yeah, he's a paranoid schizophrenic now.
I mean, basically,
Yeah.
wouldn't you be too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you return to even a semi-normal, regular lifestyle after that? You really just can't. And same thing with the whole family. You've just been in prison for 3.5 years. How do you return to what you think normal is?
Yeah.
Because now your normal is imprisonment and having to wait in line for foods and to use the bathroom. How do you just return to what normal used to be?
It's sad because the kids they want a safe place, and he used to be that. This really fun, loving kind of father, and he still loves his kids, but I thought it was interesting, like in the book they talk about like, oh, he doesn't read to us anymore, and the mom was like, you guys are grown, like he's not gonna,
Yeah.
it's just like sad and interesting.
I also like them returning back to the house. It just like it didn't really mention anything with like the kids asking about the dog.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes it
Dog
like,
in the back.
because like
Oh.
I didn't even think about
at
that.
the,
neither
like,
did
at the
I.
beginning of the story, like they were like, you know, when they were on the train or something like that, they kept asking about the dog, and like
And now they're like,
obviously
oh, yeah.
a long time has passed and things have happened,
Yeah.
but like I feel like you would think,
I didn't
like
even
ask
think
about
about
what
that.
happened with the dog.
No, these kids have probably got it in their head that this dog is dead.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, we just left the dog, this old dog. To
I don't know. I
fend
thought
for
that was
itself.
I thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah.
That like at the beginning there was like so intuitive about the dogs, like asking about it all the time, and then like at the end, obviously after everything that's happened, like you got to worry about other things, but
I think I'd like to, it kind of ties into external conflict, but I think it's interesting because when like you would think something like this would happen and they'd return home and the war's over, Japan's been bombed, and you think that maybe the prejudice against them is gonna stop. But in a way it almost gets worse
Yeah.
because people come back and they tell stories of the Pacific and Bataan Death March and Manchuria and like all the horrible things that the Japanese did, and they are even more prejudiced against Japanese Americans who obviously are innocent and they're just Americans.
Yeah.
So
Like, how much better has their life actually gotten since coming back?
yeah,
I do find it interesting, like the knowing, I guess me knowing like a lot of the history about this, how much they just cut from one thing to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Like they never
Mhm.
talked about like the bombings and stuff like that or anything like that. They just like it's just the kid like dreaming about his dad, and then the next thing you know, you turn the page and they're back home.
Yeah.
Really
Like,
humanized.
and I think that's like intentionally part of the story and like the like anonymous section of it ish, but like I don't know, my brain wants to like know the reaction and stuff like that to stuff like the bombings and know what happened in these holes.
I think in a certain sense they might not necessarily care because they're American, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like for them personally, throughout the book, they try not to focus, like, she has one moment where she kind of like reminisces about Japan,
Mhm.
but then also realizes that there's nothing for them in Japan, that's why they love Japan. And so that's, like, she kind of stops, like, she even stops listening to the news, and I guess after the war is done, she starts, like, listening to the news again, but.
Which I feel like that's a point to touch on too, is like she stopped listening to news, but then like when she gets back home, I think I remember this correctly, like she can't get enough of the news.
Yeah.
Like she
Yeah,
just
it
wants
goes on all
to
the
see
time.
more and more and more.
And her home is like when she thinks of missing home, she only thought, like you said, Japan once. And every other time it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
house on the street and the kids too.
I also thought it was, I don't know, I probably could have spent a lot more time like reading into this part and looking into this part, but that whole thing about like when they go home and they said there'd been like people living in their house.
Mhm.
Oh.
Like I like sat there as I was reading this and I was like, what? Like, and then,
Squatters.
yeah, I mean, and that's what I was kind of wondering, was it a squatting situation, or was it like, oh, these people are gone, so we're like gonna rent out their house basically, or like
It
kind
seems
of
like they might
what
have
it
gotten
was.
scammed, because there's that one
Yeah.
guy that said that he was like, oh, I'll rent out the house while you guys are gone, and
Yup.
then like just kind of
Yeah.
took the money and ran, it would seem. So
Yeah.
they might have gotten scammed. Maybe he did rent it, but he didn't like care who he rented it to at all.
Yeah, I mean, he
Um,
was pocketing the money for sure. Like,
Yeah,
obviously
either
not-
way, yeah,
Like
either
all their
way.
stuff
then-
was gone too.
I picture a lot of graffiti, like you said, the words on the walls.
Yeah, and she like
Yeah.
she like deliberately covered them up, so I'm assuming
Yeah.
that the words were not good words.
I don't think it was like a.
I think
It did not
nice
say
way out.
sunshine on the
I'm
walls.
assuming the
Welcome.
people that
Lovely
like
home.
lived
Welcome
there.
to our lovely home.
I'm assuming that like the people that lived there knew that like or that lived there when they were gone, like knew that that family used to live there, and
Yeah.
that like
Yeah.
sometime they're gonna come back and like live here
Yeah.
again, and
Mm-hmm.
you know,
It's not like they had to
Americans
chase
being
people out of the
Americans
house or whatever,
at that time.
but yeah.
Yeah. That was,
How-
yeah, I don't know, that whole section was just kinda weird, I was like, and then also like, I don't know, the part that was kinda interesting to me was like, I think they talked about like the kids went up into their room and there was like, yeah, stuff on the walls, but then like basically the pornographic like magazines.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
probably modern day Playboy-esque kinda stuff,
That was.
and,
Yeah, the mom was being weird
yeah,
about that.
and I don't know, it just kinda made me like,
She's like, you'll know someday.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know, just something about that section, I was
There was
like,
also, there was
that's
also.
just like a special kind of like disregard for the
Mhm.
people who lived there.
Yeah, there was also the section where it talked about like we slept in the living room until the wine bottle came one night, and then we moved to the upstairs bedroom. And it's just funny the way that like someone must have thrown something through their window. But it's just funny the way that they're just like. Then the wine bottle came and we had to move. You know,
It's so casual because
it's so casual because they're so used to it at this point. They're like, oh yeah, someone threw a wine bottle through a window. Yeah, it happens.
A lot of stuff coming through windows of this book.
Yeah.
A lot of defenestrating going on.
Maybe that's what it is.
No. Girl.
Should we go into
Gabby,
the
were
next
you gonna say
thing?
something?
I was, oh yeah, I remember what I was gonna say.
Okay, let me.
My thought was when they came back and their house was trashed, like maybe it was used for like homeless people living there.
Yeah.
Like if it was empty, or just like, I thought prostitution too, maybe, just because of the magazines, and I was like, I don't know, you never know what would happen there, but
Also, the neighbors stole all their stuff.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like
Like all their
gone.
furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like, hey, that's our couch. Just like looking through the window at
That's
someone
so,
else's.
Like, that's our vacuum. Whatever it was. Was it electro
That's
something?
where it went.
I don't remember.
Even the stuff they locked up. It's just-
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But they just like didn't care because they were like, well, we're home now.
Yeah, at least they're home.
Internal.
Okay.
Internal conflict.
I have a lot. I feel like numerous of them are the same thing and or kind of a stretch, so bear with me. 'Cause I just felt like the internal conflicts were very similar throughout the whole book, and there weren't really many new ones that got introduced. The first thing that I just noted was on page 89. Basically, the boy just again is like grieving his old life, and he thinks about. I thought this part was so sad. He thinks about his childhood bike.
Oh.
That part,
that's
like,
right.
Wait, what page was that?
Page 89. Oh yeah, 3 in the morning, the dead time, empty of dreams. He lay awake in the darkness, worrying about the bicycle he left behind, chained to the trunk of the persimmon tree. Had the tires gone flat, where the spokes rusted and clogged with weeds, was the key to the lock still hidden in the shed. But it was the tiny tin bell that troubled him the most, because it had a connection with his dad.
His father never screwed on.
Yeah, and so just like, I don't know, that part really got me, because it's like you can look at these characters and like forget that they're children, but then you're like, not his bike. I don't know.
Yeah, it's still the karma thing where he's just like, oh, I did this to myself.
What if I did this
Yeah.
better?
You know, it's like, man, if I
Yeah.
didn't leave my bike behind, or you know,
Yeah.
or if that bike was, like, he's just thinking about like stupid little things
Yeah.
that are just like occupying his mind, just
Yeah.
because he's too young to really understand how bad of a situation he's
Those
in.
little things, like at the time, like they don't really mean much, but like when you
Mhm.
lose them,
Yeah.
that little thing becomes a lot bigger of a thing, especially when it's associated to somebody like your father,
Yeah.
who was taken away at the knock of a door, you know?
In his bathrobe and slippers, nonetheless.
Yeah. And then I have two, one on page 93, one on 94. They're kind of the same idea, but just that the mother once again feels like pretty worthless, but she doesn't like really do anything about it, or maybe she doesn't know what to do about it. And then it just kind of mentioned that, like, I don't know, I thought the little spot on page 94 was interesting, because it talks about like she's at the end of her rope, but then it just like moves on, and you're just like, oh, okay, like there's nothing that she does about it.
She's just at the end of her rope.
I mean, I think it literally just says like something about, I can't find it exactly, but something about she was at the end of her rope, and then it just like moves on, and I was like, dang, like no action. But I guess when you're when you've been oppressed that bad, then like what are you to do? Then and then page 96, the mother has a conflict with herself and beats herself up for not getting her husband a glass of water the night that he was arrested. And she just like keeps spinning in her mind about like how thirsty he must be, when like in reality it's been a very long time since this incident, so like
He's clearly had something to drink.
right,
since
he's
then.
clearly had something to drink, but still the fact that she's like, my husband went thirsty because I didn't get him a glass of water is like a kind of like trauma grief that is just really, I mean, understandable, but also just really crazy too, of being like, here's another instance of someone like blaming themselves almost. Like she's not necessarily saying, right, that like her not getting her husband a glass of water was the reason that he was arrested, but just that, I don't know, just that grief and like beating herself up for it. The next, skip ahead a little bit, on page 113, when they were talking about their freedom, and I just said like it was kind of a positive internal conflict of just like they were just thinking about the joy of you know, quote unquote normal life, but then married that with still the struggle of like not having a lot of food and things just not quite being right. So like the weird dichotomy between like, yay, this is home and like this should be great and it is great, it's so much better than where we were, but it's still not what it used to be. So kind of the grief and the joy that are married together. And then page 123, I wrote that they like the idea of having to return to quote unquote normal life and pretend that everything was okay, even though their hearts like still had very deep troubles. So the specific thing I was thinking about was the kids talk about like going back to school, right? And you know, the teachers asked if everything was all right, and we nodded our heads and said yes, of course we're fine. And they made sure to like try to be extra polite and stuff like that, but the friends that they had before no longer wanted anything to do with them, and they said that, you know, they used to walk home together and, you know, say whose house they were going over to, but now they walked alone. Yeah, so again, just like that struggle of like the joy of like being back at school and like some semblance of normal, but realizing it's never gonna be like it was. And then when dad comes home around page 131 to 133, the internal struggle of like being excited to see their dad, but also being horrified at his appearance and not really being sure if it was him, and just like all the unknown comes with that. And then page 134, I just kind of summarize that as like obviously their dad's like really harsh adjustment back, and just like the horrible state that he's in, and just the kids like struggling with that internally as well, thinking like it's something that they did, and just it's kind of everybody's internal struggle when dad comes back. And then lastly, from the weird little confession chapter,
It was cool though.
what?
So it was cool.
It was, we should talk about that at the end, I think.
Yes, definitely.
But I just kind of noted just generally in that little section, just kind of the inner turmoil of some degree that that person experiences knowing that he ruined people's lives. But then again, doesn't really like, I don't know, seems to feel bad about it, but then also seems to like kind of just say all of this just to like get it off of his back, or like not feel so guilty about it. Yeah, like the whole thing like at the very end of the book when it says like, and if they ask you someday what it was I wanted to say, please tell them if you would, it was this, I'm sorry, there, that's it, I said it, now can I go? It's like the little kid that like, I don't know, I just thought about like the little kid that the teacher makes apologize.
Yeah.
That's really only like saying sorry because they got caught, not sorry because they did it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was huge.
Like a forced sorry.
Yeah, like that was huge in here of being like, you know, socially I guess it was wrong, but like I don't really regret it. And so like that weird, I don't know, it was kind of
But
a
he's
weird.
also like just capping the entire chapter.
Just what?
He's just like making stuff up.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
entire
Oh, he's
chapter,
capping, I
'cause
guess.
I assume he's not actually the chicken sexer.
Just like saying what they
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, he's. And I know a healthy young rooster when I see one.
Yeah.
But like through that entire chapter, because I assume that it's probably the father talking. Because, you know, it says, I was wearing my bathrobe, my slippers the night your men took me away. So he's just making stuff up. He's just telling them what they want to hear so that they, I don't know, so that things go easily. It's like the full abuse of the model minority. So we can talk about that later when you talk about the model
I
minority.
want to jump back. You were talking about like the fathers, like trying to get back to like normalcy and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I feel like if I like put myself in the position of the father, like getting back, it said like on page 134 that like he never went back to work, which I feel like had to be so hard for him because on the next page he like said, or perhaps he was remembering the promise he made to her years before, right after they were first married. You'll never have to work. He felt bad because he hadn't come through. It was like, you know, he made that promise to his wife, like, you know, I'm gonna be working the whole time, so you never have to. And now he gets back, and the tables are turned. I'm used to saying the turned table. But it's like, you know, now he's the one that can't work because like he's old, he's got a cane, you know, he really can't do much, which is really sad. And now she's got to do all the working, and you know, it just like completely defeats the promise that he made years ago. And I feel like that from his point of view, that just has to be so defeating after trying to enter a normal life now.
He just seems like so mentally exhausted from everything.
Yeah.
Like not only like physically did he like age, but like mentally. Like I remember it described him like staring out the bedroom window, and the kids were just like looking at him, and he was just like sitting on the edge of it, just like staring.
Yeah.
He was just like no one saw him.
Were they the ones that got the bamboo shards shoved underneath the fingernails, or is that the American
That was
troops?
one of the American troops. Yeah.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
It's just
Thinking about that.
that whole thing with the father is just emblematic of how life is like can never truly go back to how it
No.
was before.
It can never be the same.
And how, you know, it's like they had a good thing going and the US government just comes in, scoops them up, plops them in the desert, and it's like, all right, go back to where you were, and then just moves off with no regard for what what actually just happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Alright, did you wanna go?
Sure, I'll get it.
Archetype.
Sure, yeah.
So, last week I said fish out of water, and I said that like someone who's in an environment that they're not used to, that they don't belong in, and either it's funny or it's dramatic. And I also saw a lot more of that, but in a different way. Like fish out of water in the first half, it was them in the camp, they didn't belong there. And then fish out of water in this half, it's like they're home and they still don't belong there. And it's just like, yeah, it's just really, really sad. There were 4 things I noticed. So 1, their home was not the same. 2, their dad wasn't the same. Their neighbors, the community did not treat them the same, and their lifestyle wasn't the same. So it was like everything. So for the dad, that was a lot like what all you guys say, page 104, page 132 through 135, like when he came back and just how he's traumatized, and the kids just, they already had, I don't want to say they had expectations because I think they were all kind of nervous. I mean, I think they had hopes for how it would be. I mean, the boy definitely had hopes for how it would be, but it was just, yeah. And there were like little things the father would do, like he would make them a snack, like jelly and crackers, and that was sweet. But yeah, he was a little more angry, he was not very stable, so that was very different. And then the way that the neighbors treated them, yeah, like taking their furniture. The thing that stood out to me a lot was when the mom was trying to get a job, and they like nicely let her down, even though that's not nice. Like they have their intentions for why they're not hiring her.
They sort of say we don't want to offend the other workers.
Yeah.
I feel like the other part of that is like, we'll give you a job, but like you're gonna sit like in the very back in like a dark closet or something like that, so you're not seen.
Yeah.
It's like, you know why they're not gonna like verbally tell you why, but you know.
And especially the work that the mom is doing is not like work that most people look on like, oh wow, like she's washing clothes, she's doing laundry, like she has the dirty work that nobody wants. and they're like barely getting by, and they weren't used to that. Like, I think in the first half they talked about all the trips they went on, and like, oh, my dad's gonna take me here when he gets back, and so that's all flipped around. I said page 115 for the neighbors. I think that was either like on the street or when they had their stuff. Yeah. Oh yeah, that was when they were coming back. They were walking back to their house, and like all the people saw them leave, but when they came back, nobody said a word. Or when they did talk, it was very like surface level, like, oh, I haven't seen you in a while, it's been so long. And it's like, come on, you know.
You know exactly what happened, you're just not gonna say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the poor lifestyle, the home not being the same was just really like, yeah. Like you said, the magazines, the graffiti, their stuff taken, destroyed. What's the right word? It stood out to me how like the first night, even though they had all those rooms and they dreamed of like sleeping in their own beds the whole time, they still all slept together. Not just like in the same room, but they went in the same positions they were in. Like the same parts of the room, which was just so, wow.
It's almost like PTSD.
Yeah. So that was it. And then the other archetype I noticed was quest. So like a character on a journey for something or like a goal in mind. I said that their goal was to leave the camp, be reunited with the father, just return to like a sense of normalcy. And of course, that did not happen. And what I noticed was like page 93 through 96, the mom, like, just her depression, she was just not, she was crushed and just not hopeful, and kind of like, the whole, when they talked about like the curtain, and when she would dream and stuff like that, it was slowly like, yeah, she was just very sad. And how the kids were almost trying to make her feel better rather than the other way around. And I also said page 96, that someone else like mentioned that when the girl was like jumping rope or something, and her and her legs were all like, oh my gosh,
that makes
everything.
that makes
It's the most
sense.
fun.
I'm with the crank.
Like, where was I even going with that?
Sorry.
No, that's
It's
not
just
your
funny.
fault. I'm trying to like, I don't understand how that ties. Okay, yeah, I think it ties to trust where it's like, instead of, their circumstances are so hard that it's hard for them to even believe that they're going back anymore, so that's kind of how it relates to Quest. And then, what's the other thing? Oh yeah, page 114, I might have already mentioned that. Maybe I did. It was when they were like ashamed of their culture and how they would just make themselves like so small and just not stand out and everything. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, the other thing, I think this is the last thing that stood out, was the questionnaire on page 99, I think, and it was like a question about the emperor, and the mom was like, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah, will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign invasive forces, blah, blah, forswear any allegiance or obedience to the emperor. And she was like, what allegiance? She's been in America for 20 years. So, that stood out to me. And those really yeah. You know what? Yeah. I don't know
That was
those points.
well, and those were interesting because like if you, I think it said like if you answered no on those, like you'd still like give your allegiance to Japan. They like just I think they took you to a different camp, which like they did something. I don't know what they
Do
did.
something.
Always
Which I mean, that's like an insane thing to, like, it's your home country, right?
Yeah.
You'll never truly, like, even if you were born in like North Korea or something like that, you're still Korean, and you'll still have that feeling, your whole life of like, You know, that's where I'm from. I can't just, I would be
You can't just
disappointed to
not
watch
be-
it get wiped off off the map, you know?
Right.
Like, I got memories there. I
Like,
once
that's why-
lived there.
That's what I was like. What I was saying earlier, like how they completely just skipped over like the bombings of Hiroshima and
Mhm.
Nagasaki, because like the mom still has family back in Japan, even though she's been living there for like 20 years. She still has family there. So
Yeah.
like, what if they were affected by that? You know, I feel like that's just not a point you can easily skip over, because that was insanely significant in the war, obviously, but also in the world. So.
I think they did that like so purposefully because they want to emphasize like how much they were Americans.
Yeah.
And like they were focused on getting back to their home and being with their family and like the American things that they did. They were like so
Yeah,
wanting the
I think
audience
it's
to
valid.
realize that.
I think that's valid. So.
Okay, I also did fish out of water, but I kind of focused more on like I think part of the archetype of fish out of water is how they adjust to the new setting. And so for the second half of the book, you see this in the camps a little bit. So on page 92 and 93, we see that the girl starts acting unusual. She like starts hanging out with her friends only, smoking cigarettes, being disrespectful to her mom, being a little rebellious. And that's kind of like, you know, is that her being like a preteen? Maybe. But is it also like the result of them being there for that long? Probably also. And then immediately after also on page 93 and then on 94, we talked about this earlier, but the mom is kind of like, you see her almost start to give up in a way. It seems like she's starting to like lose her strength and motivation, and that's like been a pinnacle with the whole book. Like she's a strong woman, she's doing everything for her kids, but she starts to kind of just give up towards the end, and so that's her, I feel like, adjusting to this really bad situation. And then on 102, it talks really briefly right before like they cut away from that past, like all the camp stuff. It says that like street signs are coming up, like the camps kind of turned into like a city almost. So they're like, it's like this formal thing, almost more like this permanent thing. And so that's how like the camp has kind of adjusted and changed to almost feel normal. And then of course we also talked about how when they go back home after all this time of hoping and dreaming, now they're almost like even more a fish out of water in their hometown than even kind of before the war, during Pearl Harbor and stuff. So do you guys want to go over the tier words really quick before we get into the questions for the sake of time?
No, I don't need to.
Okay.
Are they really that important?
I have like a couple, and they were all
Okay.
the same. They were just places like I can't even pronounce it. Kagoshima, Kanfaran. Like I just feel like that might be.
Oh,
Yeah, people probably aren't familiar with where they actually are.
And
So
then Azukai means just exact like something.
yeah.
Okay.
But that's it.
All right. So I also had question one. So how is racism woven throughout when the emperor was divine? I think we've all talked about it. I think we've had a lot of discussion about like the subtlety of the book. Like everything is cut and dry and black and white, and they don't focus on things like Hiroshima or Nagasaki and the wine bottle smashed through their window. It's super subtle. I think part of that is because I think in society, some of like the most effective and true forms of racism is subtle in a way. I think that, of course, you can think of the systematic approach of like, yeah, we're taking the Japanese and putting them in the camp. Like that's a big racism or discriminatory thing, but it's almost a bigger deal when they're in their hometown and people won't talk to them, they'll ignore them, they'll ask them to leave or whatever. So that was kind of my take on it.
I had two. So basically, model minority is just a stereotype that portrays them as successful and hardworking group, and the people, the characters in the story, like had to overcome obstacles to achieve success. And a thing I thought of was the workplace and like education. Like Asian Americans, they face like lots of bias, even if they were like highly qualified for the job. And Hannah touched on this earlier, but I thought of when the mom was trying to get hired, and like she'd show up and they'd say like, nope, like we already have the position filled. So yeah, I don't know.
You wanna go first, or do you want me?
Sure, mine's kind of quick. So imprisonment and freedom, I said even when they're free, like not in a camp, they're still in their own old personal habits. They're still doing the same things, sleeping the same, eating the same. To everybody else is still not like welcoming them back. They're still being racist. They're still treating them unfairly. They're still very poor, a lot worse off than they were before. Treated very harshly. Their father is traumatized. Like they're not physically in prison, but they're not free right now. So I mean, okay, they're free to do what they want, but they don't have like the resources they once had, and people aren't treating them like they're free, like they're not doing anything wrong. And yeah, I'm done.
Like drop.
So I kind of said that like you really see how much like the effects of their imprisonment based off what they kind of have now during their freedom, if that makes sense. Part of me wishes that like at the beginning of the book they showed like, I think we talked about this the other week, like they showed a glimpse of like what their normal life actually looks like before they were in prison. So because like I feel like that would help show the effects of kind of like their imprisonment, but like it just shows like what they have now kind of based on like what they had when they were in prison. So like, I mean, I think it touched on like they don't have to like wait in lines anymore to go to the bathroom or to get food. They're not like hearing people through their walls, you know, not hearing all their conversations and stuff like that. And it's just like, you know, while they don't necessarily feel free in the situation they're in, they technically are, but I feel like the effects of their imprisonment obviously like still just stay with them, and that just feeds into what their life is now and their new normal, which is really tough. So.
Number 4?
Social class.
Oh, sorry, that was the chair. How is social class and the American dream demonstrated when the emperor was divine? I saw on page 93 when it was during the winter. It says, their old life seemed far away and remote to him now, like a dream he could not quite remember. The bright green grass, the roses, the house on the wide street not far from the sea. That was another time, a different year. So basically they had the American dream, in a sense. They had a nice house on the sea. Like, I want a house on the sea. I think that'd be nice. But like, there's this green grass, roses, like everything was, like they're a loving family. That's basically what they had. They had the American dream, just thriving. Because they weren't dirt poor. I don't know, we kind of talked about it last week. Like, they weren't like poor. Like, they were doing,
Kind of well off.
yeah.
Yeah, I think they're probably
Yeah, because they were,
class at least.
yeah. So they basically had that until it was stripped away from them because of the war.
We're living in California.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're pretty well off,
Doing
actually,
okay.
I would
That was during
assume.
the Great Depression too.
How use that culture?
What? Okay. Oh, my head page 99 down. So give me a sec. I want to see why I did this.
While you're touching on that, finding that, I feel like now that you said like that they were like not exactly poor, I feel like that's another part of like their imprisonment and stuff like that is like they had all that, now they don't, and like I think it touches on it later, like they're like making sure they're like taking advantage of what they do have. Like, you know, I think it said in the book, like, you know, eat your carrots or like eat everything you have because like, you know, what we have we have to take advantage of.
I'm pretty sure it
Etc.
actually
like
uses
that.
the starving children in Africa line at some
Yeah,
point.
I think
Oh,
so.
no, they say actually Europe, which
Oh,
was
in Europe?
interesting when they said Europe.
Yeah,
because
so it's
I've
like
never
there's
heard somebody say
starving
that.
children.
You know,
You're
because
right.
they don't
Starving
have it
children
a
in
lot, and they
Yeah.
I feel like they almost have to like ration it. So it's like it's very different from what they knew. So
Mhm.
anyway,
So I found why. It's just because when she's talking about, like when they're talking about the allegiance to America, she said that there was no future for us there because they had everything that they needed basically, what they had before the war. So yeah, that's what I had. I was mostly focused on the American dream.
Way to go, way to go.
So assimilation and loss of identity. I mean, again, I talked about with loss of identity a lot last time. The fact that they don't even have names is pretty emblematic of how like they don't really have an identity. But like even with assimilation, I mean, the last confession chapter, the father just completely assimilates to like what they are expecting of him, right? He just completely caves instantly and is just like, yeah, I'm the guy. I was selling secrets to Japan. I was spitting in your food. I would kill puppies because I felt like it. Yeah, I was.
bad dude.
Yeah, I was a real bad apple. Me. Yep. Me, Mr. Kidnapped in his bathrobe. Yep, you got me.
Never said
Oh, yeah,
that.
you
Just
said
that's all I gotta say. I'm sorry.
Stole puppies.
You know, you just instant what?
Okay.
He's talking to you. Like, the camera.
No.
Why he's talking?
Bro's whispering to the camera
No,
over
he's-
there.
This is whispering Morse code over there.
beep,
Yeah, but yeah, but he just like instantly just caves and assimilates, and like I touched on it earlier, it's just a complete like abuse of the model minority that they were, because they didn't want to cause any problems. They wanted to just come to America and live the American dream, and that's it. Like they wanted to be like normal people there. And so now that they're being accused of causing problems, they're like, no, we don't want any problems. We don't want anything. And so they were willing to just completely comply to the demands of, you know, what the U.S. government wanted from them. And like I said, it's just completely abusing them because of their desire to be that model minority. So.
Okay, I have number 6. I had to look up what the word inscrutability means because I didn't know. So basically, it means that something is like impossible to know. So for instance, I mean, they kind of knew why they were getting locked up, but there again wasn't a really good reason, except the US was like, ooh, spooky, scared. Maybe they're spies, maybe they're not. Let's lock them up anyway, because we're scared. I also mentioned too, just like the namelessness of the characters makes the story very universal. So it leads to like the inscrutability of identity. Like it's impossible to know who these people actually were, but that was kind of the whole point anyway. And then again, I just talked about like there's a lot of unknown elements, like their identities with them not having names, but also kind of what was censored within the letters, for instance. I don't know if you guys felt this way, but I kind of like at the end of the story kind of felt like there was a lot that kind of like lurked in the shadows of like the unknown. But I think that was probably very purposeful, kind of maybe making us somewhat feel like what they would have felt like, and just having to constantly live in that unknown, and things were not always clear even way after the fact. And yeah, just I mentioned too, like fear of the unknown, like with the incarceration, like they didn't know what was happening, what was going on. And then kind of what I just said too, of like the way that the story is written and things like that kind of makes us have to become comfortable with with the unknown, and just the idea that like even though the story kind of has a happy ending, there's still a lot like up in the air, and it's really not the happiest of endings.
Yeah. There's almost an overbearing sense of just nihilism at the end, right? Where there's so much that is unknown, but it almost feels like just no one really cares, because they're like, we've been through whatever, and
Like, oh, well, it's over.
you know, they're like, it's so, like, their house is so destroyed and everything like that, but it's not like they like break down in tears
Is there a survival?
over that.
mode?
They just, yeah, they're just like, well, we have a roof over our heads,
It's literally survival mode.
you know,
yeah.
and
Like
so
you
they,
said, yeah.
yeah, so they just kinda have lost the ability to care as much as they did before.
A bigger fish to fry than
Yeah,
dwelling.
and so they don't, yeah, so they're not focused on the unknown as much, but
When were they
even
living?
though there's so much more.
When were they living in the horse stables?
Yeah, that confused me a little bit. of
Because
when
was
that's
that not, was that before they were, because they talked about it while they were living in the house, I thought.
Were they, was it the train that was an old, like?
Yeah.
that
Was it a flashback? Okay, that's kinda confused sometimes in the book.
But wasn't the train like an old,
The train that they
Horse.
initially traveled in to get to the camp.
was it old horse?
Oh, is that what they
I
were
think
talking
you're
about?
right.
Is that
Well, I
what-
thought that he said it was too hot, it's too hot for it to be,
I thought he
Like
saw.
they
cause he said
transport
usually, cause he
horses
never
on
slept in the,
That's what I thought it was.
but he said he
Like-
never slept in the horse stables. That's why he knew he was on the train.
Oh, that might have been right before then.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay.
Yeah,
I guess the
actually,
book,
I remember that, I think that's what it was.
the book kinda
I think they
skips over.
stayed there before they.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Woo. Hour
Alright, well done.
Nice.
Any last thoughts about the book? Was it better than The
What
Outsiders?
would you rate it out of 10?
Me?
10.
5.
Really?
Really?
Yeah,
10?
I'll give it like a
Maybe
6.
like a
Ten's
8. I think it was very
Well,
well
give it
written.
like a
Especially the details.
Oh.
7.
7,
I wanted a
I
romance
think
for
it's
the
I think
boy.
it's well
I liked
written
The
and
Outsiders
everything.
more,
I,
but-
oh,
Yeah, me
The
too.
Outsiders is way better.
Way
but-
more dialogue and like stuff going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, it's just, I think my
Yeah.
biggest issue with the book is just, and this is just kind of a personal thing, it's just that it feels like nothing really happens. It's like, a lot of things happen,
Yeah.
but nothing like, it's not like there's one big plot that's like moving forward the whole
Mhm.
time, it's just
Yeah.
kinda like,
I will-
and then we were here, and here's a massive block of text about what we were doing when we were
They
there.
skip over so much time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know, like when they had said
life.
like they'd been away for years, I was like,
I know, I was
years
like,
have
wait,
passed.
what?
Yeah.
I
I
thought
know,
they were
I'm
being
like-
exaggerative.
I think it was
That's just
shows
life,
the
you know?
monotony of
Sometimes you don't have a
everyday
huge
life,
plot
and
in your life.
There was really
Just
nothing
live it.
monumental that happened within those 3 years.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's
It's
just
like-
mentioning.
It's all part of like the anonymous people as well. Like,
It's not supposed to be
it's
an
meant to
action
be.
story.
Yeah.
And
It's
it's
meant,
exactly
it's meant to
what
be anonymous and to like show
A little bit, yeah.
Really?
It's
the
not
tragedy that
Oh,
this
yeah.
actually
Exactly.
is.
Be a
It's not
spy.
supposed to entertain you. This is an experience.
The
People, so
CIA
it's not to
show
be like,
tomorrow.
oh, when is someone gonna like? It's supposed
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be
Like, it's-
boring too.
It's not
Boy
supposed
gonna
to be
die?
like, it's not supposed to be like, when is something gonna happen? It's supposed to just like reflect on what this actually is and how
Yes.
awful it is.
That's why
No,
it's
I
boring.
get all of that. It's just also, it's like, there are ways that you can do that to make it still be entertaining. You can make boring things entertaining.
I
There was a war
entertaining.
going on in the background the whole time, so.
Yeah.
There was a big
I-
event
I
happening.
get like
Wait,
8.5.
is that your
I'm not,
phone?
huh?
Is that your phone?
Yeah.
Oh. That's weird.
Why?
We're not
You're
done
just
yet.
like messing around with it?
No, I just wondered.
We're not done yet, so I'll pick it up.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, any other thoughts on it? I like the Outsiders way more.
Yeah, I do too.
I think they're just so different.
Yeah,
I
say
don't
they're-
Yeah, they are very
It's-
different.
it's very
kinda
hard to compare.
Yeah,
I'm
one's
not-
a good, one's a bad.
One of the it's like also not written to the same age group. I feel.
True.
The Outsiders is very like
Yeah.
tell not show.
Very.
And it's good and fun, but like this is so different. This is like I'm not gonna explain why I said this. You are going to like understand it. So I strongly disagree with 5.
For me, it was really weird because the graphic novel I read was on the same topic as
Oh,
this.
yeah.
So like I was able to
Oh.
like not only read it but also see it with like images and stuff like that. So I don't know, for like this one it was like harder for me to like understand a little bit. I think a lot of that was like because it was anonymous and stuff like that. There
Yeah.
wasn't like much of a storyline. With the graphic novel I read, there was a lot more of a storyline to it and I could actually like see what was happening and more of that. So it was like definitely easy to understand and like see, I could actually like see the tragedy of it with like facial expressions and stuff like that. So that definitely made it more interesting.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yep, thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
Pterodactyl.
Like and follow for more.
Pterodactyl.